welcome. And today I'm joined on Story Live by Maggie Sarfo. Welcome, Maggie. Good to see you.
Thank you, Rachel, and hello, everyone.
We've known each other over quite a period of time now, haven't we?
We have, yes.
I know we were both within the Athena network, but I don't think I actually met you until you also became a regional director for Athena. So how long ago is that, Maggie, now?
So this January, I think that would be 3 years. Yes, 3
Okay,
years.
so it's not so very long.
Yeah, I was a member for a year before becoming a regional director. Yes.
Right. Okay. Yes. And you were a member in a completely different region than the one you've taken over, weren't you?
Yes. Yeah, in Reading.
Yeah, and that's, I may have met you there, I'm not sure, but I am now a member in one of the Reading groups, but that was when you were. And your groups now, of course, are in the City of London, aren't they?
Yes, all 4 of them are in the square mile in the city. Yes.
Great. And I've been up to, I think I've spoken at all of them, haven't I now? And coming.
You have. You've got a few more coming up. Well, we love you, Rachel.
Great. Oh, thank you. So Maggie, but I know in terms of business, you are also a business consultant, aren't you? And so I just wondered if you'd like to say a little bit more about that and just generally give us your backstory about how you became a business consultant, branched out and also added to that your Athena region. Yeah, just tell us how you came to be doing that.
Thank you, Rachel. So I have been in the business consulting, sales leadership world, I'll say roughly 18 years now. I started off initially initially I did a French and English degree, and those were the days when I used to think I was going to work for the United Nations and all of that, because I just loved French. and so, it was like, I'm going to work for the UN. And then when I finished uni, my first work was in a university library working in the HR department. We used to call them personnel at that time, so personnel department. And then a few months later, they offered for me to go and do what they called a master's in public administration. And just a few months that I spent in the environment was enough for me to know that it wasn't necessarily the environment I wanted to stay for much longer. And so I declined and very politely thanked them for it. And then I decided to do a master's in business administration rather. And the reason for doing that was I was always very fascinated about why some businesses make money and why others don't. And for me, profitability was always a thing. Whenever I get a chance, I'll do something to get some money, teach some kids and their parents will pay me, that kind of thing. So I've always been that kind of enterprising person.
So presumably once you realised that first course was not for you, that was the end of the dream of the United Nations job, was it? Yeah.
For that particular one, I look back on it and smile all the time. It's a great thing. Having said that, I have had the opportunity to use my French every now and again. Like, I've made friends because they were French and I could speak a bit of French. And yeah, so yeah, for that particular line, that's where it ended. Yes.
And would that job necessarily have taken you to New York to live? If you'd got a job at the United Nations?
Possibly. I have always been, and that's a good question to ask. I've always been that person who calls himself a citizen of the world. If I live somewhere and it feels right for me, I can easily call that place home.
Okay.
So maybe you could have taken me to there or to Brussels or wherever.
Yeah. Oh yes, of course, Brussels as well. But I just wondered if that was part of I know the French was obviously the big motivation, but I wondered if being in one of those two places.
I always wanted to move around and live in the US and other places, and I still do. But then incidentally, the other roles that I followed as part of this path, my last corporate career, I was working with a company called Gartner, which is a big IT analyst firm, still in the consulting world, advising leaders in the tech industry. And that took me to the US many, many times. I had the opportunity to go to Hawaii, Miami, and all other places, Miami, and all of that. So, yeah.
Interesting, because it's often, isn't it? We often set these goals, and obviously, as I say, you've used your French, you've travelled, and actually maybe you didn't need that job in the United Nations after all, because you could do those things without that.
Yeah.
When we're younger, we don't know how we can achieve the travel or the using the French, so you find something to fix on. But
exactly
what you were asking for was those two things. Job done. You've done.
Exactly.
Yeah. So after that course, what sort of roles did you find yourself in?
So then I found myself being in consulting roles, and then very quickly I recognized that even though I hadn't necessarily planned it, a lot of my clients were more the leaders within the organization. So the managing directors, the CEOs, whether it's a big organization or a small organization. And I also found that I actually liked working with those type of people because somehow they got me. And it was later, you know, when you piece back the incidents, you realize that I think I am very strategic and I can look at a situation and say, oh, well, if we went in this direction, this is where we will end. But if we really want to go in that direction, then perhaps we could take this direction. And that's how I also realized that the idea of giving advice was really what made me really excited about everything that I do. And then even though I moved on because of my love for profitability, then for some reason, I also did not understand the concept of being paid a monthly salary at all. I wasn't even joking. I didn't understand how or why I should be paid a salary, because I always was the type of person who would look at the amount of work I've done and how much effort I've put and the results I was getting. I'm like, well, I shouldn't be paid a monthly salary. I need to be paid in a way that is equivalent to my effort or how much results I'm getting. And so I think naturally then, because my consulting work was also around business growth in general, then I realized I was moving more and more into consulting around sales leadership, growth, and that kind of thing. And so I took on sales roles as well. And then imagine my excitement when I realized that, you know, in sales, yes, you get paid a monthly salary, but you can also get paid a commission, which is equivalent to how well you've worked. That for me was just the icing on the cake, and it fitted me very perfectly, I think.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because actually I was on Clubhouse this morning listening in, and they were talking about different kind of entrepreneurships and how the business that we run, whether it's going to be a multi-million business or whether it's going to be a one-person business, it needs to be suited not only in the actual topic of the business, as it were, but in the way it's run to the personality of the business owner. And their premise was that nobody is born an entrepreneur. But it's interesting. Can I ask you, if you don't mind, were your parents in paid employment or were they self-employed?
My parents were in paid employment. So my dad was a university lecturer. So I lived from one campus to the other for quite a bit. So my dad, but then my dad was a very self-made man as well. So, I mean, he lived in the days, I grew up in Ghana, and he lived in the days where, you know, he had to be in Ghana, but take his A-levels here in London. So, and he was kind of a very, what they call self-made, self-taught man. And, you know, so even though he ended up being the dean of a university faculty, he had done most, because his dad died around when he was 2 years old. So, and he was the first, you know, with about 7 siblings. So he did quite a lot by himself. And then my mum was a university librarian as well. So they were in paid employment.
Yeah. Now the reason I ask that is because, you know, that's really interesting then. So in a sense, quite a maverick approach by saying, I don't want to earn for the salary, I want to be paid what I'm worth, which is great.
Yeah.
So that's that. So how does running Athena fit alongside or within that, or how do you run the two together?
So running Athena, in a way, it happened by chance, but not, if you see what I mean. So when I came out of kind of employment, my corporate role, I'll say just over 4 years now, I've found myself as an entrepreneur, and I suddenly realized that I needed to meet with similar people. And so I started looking for networks in the area. And at that time, we had moved from West London towards the Reading area on the M4. And when I was searching, Athena kept coming on board, and it was like, why is Athena coming up? I had met Athena before. So this was back in 2009, 2010, when I used to actually lead a business network in West London Park Royal called the Park Royal. So that's an estate of about 2,000 businesses, and I used to run networks and events and things like that. And at that time, Athena in Ealing and Chiswick, the regional directors at that time met with me because they wanted their members to attend some of my events and vice versa. So that was the relationship, or that's how my connection with Athena had started. And then this was me quite a few years later, Athena coming up, and I was like, well, because I'm setting up a business that is still going to be about consulting and growth and sales, maybe Athena might not be the right network for me. I was looking for tech companies in particular as well, tech and services companies. But it came up, and so I'm the type of person who will jump onto things even when I can see the full picture. So I did jump onto it, and I got in touch with the wonderful Debbie Atkins in Reading, and we had a conversation. I visited I think in November, so then I joined the January. And then almost a year later, an opportunity came up because I started doing a talk on how to craft winning sales strategies. And it was such a hit in the Reading area. It was such a hit in the Maidenhead area with Karen's groups. And so it excited me to take it back to London. And so I contacted some of the regional directors. And then when I got to the city group at that time, a lady called Stella Femi, who was in charge of the city, she said to me, well, so my request was, can I visit and possibly do a talk on how to craft winning sales strategies? And her response was, well, have you thought about owning your own group? And I was like, oh, that's a very different answer to the question, but I'm excited all the same. But 2 weeks prior to that, my sister, Kate, has said, you know, with all the roles that you've ever done, the ones about membership are the ones that make you glow. And so when this kind of happened, I was like, oh, maybe something is happening. And so I looked into it, and then a few weeks later, I had become the regional director. So actually, this January is my 3rd year being a regional director for all the city groups.
Yeah, and actually that's really interesting. And talking about membership, it's reminded me that actually our paths keep crossing, you know, outside of Athena, don't they, as well? Yeah. Because we're both involved with a wonderful network called the Sister Network.
Yes.
Which, you know, kind of, yeah, it's about raising women up, or women raising women, isn't it? And again, set up in the Reading area, but also we've both done some work and involved with Women in the Law UK.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah. So what would you say then to Maggie, to somebody who was thinking about a career in business or whatever? What would be your sort of message for them?
So I would say it's important to, well, I love a career in business, so I always say business is great. But it's important for you to keep the main thing the main thing. And I have had conversations with people where I've said to them, is this a business or a charity? And if it's a business, let's run it like a business. And if it's a charity, then of course we will run it as a charity. So it's exciting to be in business. I think it's important for you to keep the main thing, because there are aspects within business that is not kind of a natural, you know, flair for everybody. Things like looking at the financial aspects of business, or going for business like the sales elements of that, or doing the accounts or the finances. That's not my strong point at all. That kind of thing. So it's important that we know what we're going in for, but it's a very exciting area, and I will say go for it and just make sure that If there are areas that are not your forte, just make sure you have a good support team around you, and yeah, you'll be successful.
Okay. Now, if that wasn't enough to keep somebody busy, I know what you'd really like to chat to us about is something that is almost a completely different part of yourself. This is what I love about these story lives, because somebody meeting you, probably in Athena, they might not be so surprised, but I'm guessing that people that meet you in your business consultancy role would be quite surprised to learn that actually you have a, I use the word sort of spiritual, I use the word, I call it woo. And so, so
all of those words.
Because that's really fascinating.
So I'm a certified Akashic Records consultant. So yes, it's spiritual work, it's woo-woo work. Is also scientific work. There's a perfectly plausible quantum scientific explanation to it as well. But it all weaves very neatly into this journey, and I wanted to specifically talk about how my journey has evolved from childhood up until now, and how when I look back at it now, I see the pieces and go, oh, actually I can piece it together, and even though on the surface it looks like one is here and the other is there, they're not so apart after all. So the Akashic Records, just for the benefit of people who are not familiar with the word, because most people are not, it's a Sanskrit word. It means the ether or the universe. And the concept is that as the world came into being, there was a field of energy that started recording everything and anything that was happening. And this information is stored in the DNA of the universe. So that's the scientific element of it. And quantum science has ways of explaining this in so many different ways. And then on a spiritual level, the Akashic Records. So we have the universal Akashic Records, which is anything and everything. So if you look at Google, for instance, then when you want to find out a bit about maybe a mobile phone, you type in mobile phone and Google serves you the information. And then there is the individual Akashic Records, which in a way is the person's Akashic Records. Again, we can explain it by saying, as we come into being, everything and anything about us is recorded in our own DNA. And so when we say we want to access our Akashic Records, then it's about going to our own DNA and you know, asking questions for this information to come out. But also we then go into more even the spiritual elements, because every spiritual practice, every religion, for instance, in the Bible, they call it the book of life. So every spiritual practice has a way of explaining this. But it's about your soul's record, so information about you. And it includes information about your core purpose. For instance, what did you say you were coming into this lifetime to do? And also includes information about your gifts and your abilities and what you can give to the world. It also includes information that explains maybe some of the challenges that we may be facing, that we have looked all around us, but we can't find an answer or a way of resolving it. Sometimes once you are able to go into your Akashic Records and retrieve that information, you are able to bring it into resolution, or you will be given some information in terms of how to resolve it so you can live your happiest life. Because believe it or not, we meant to live our happiest lives ever. So yes, and that is very interesting work. And we talk about things like past lives, if it impacts our present lives. We also talk about evolutionary future paths. So the future is never set in stone, but knowing who we are really allows us to be able to create our lives in the now. And also the future paths will depend on the decisions and the choices that we make in the now. But how this work came to me was I was going through a patch where I knew that I really needed to step out of my corporate world, because everything I was doing wasn't necessarily going the way I wanted it to go anymore, even though I was using the same tools that used to make me really successful. So, but you do resist because you don't want to leave the 6-figure salary. You know, how do you pay for the mortgage and all of that? But one morning, but I knew I was then getting unhappy because there were aspects of my life that was very imbalanced at that time. And one morning, as I was coming out of meditation, all I could hear was the word Akasha just ringing in my ears. And yeah, and then I was like, what does that mean? And I pick up my phone and everything is saying 333. My number of emails says 333. The time is 333. And so I go to my assistant Google, and Google tells me Akasha is related to the Akashic Records. And one thing led to the other. I bought a book about how to read the Akashic Records. And there was a prayer in that book, or a sacred code in that book, which I used. And then I was able to access my own Akashic Records, information about myself and everything. And then but I felt there was more to it, so I kept searching. And then I came across a guy who lives in Miami. He's Mexican. He's been working with the Akashic Records for about 20 plus years. And I got in touch with him, and he did a consultation for me that kind of revealed what I was seeing, but also resisting, that the Akashic Records was part of the roadmap for the next stage of my business. Wow. And the next stage of my life. And so, because that was also confirmed by someone else reading the Akashic Records for me, they was like, okay, maybe I should surrender now. But at that time, I had been pushed out of my corporate role anyway. So then I went to one of his schools, kind of retreat centers in Guatemala, for a period of about 3 weeks, meeting about 20 odd people from all over the world. And that's where I got certified officially as a level 3 Akashic Records consultant, which means I read the records for myself, I read it for other people, I read it for the collective in terms of groups of people. I read business Akashic Records. So long as a business is trading, it has its own Akashic Records. I read for animals, buildings, and all of that. And so I combine this with my business growth and personal growth work. And it's been an incredible journey. But going back to why I wanted to talk about the word advice, going back into my life, I see that the word advice has featured in each of these careers because it's something that always kind of makes me really excited. So even when I was a salesperson, I wasn't the salesperson who would just sell something and move on to the next one. I wanted to stay around enough to see the impact of my work on the business. When I was a child, I used to have friends who were much older than me, and everyone used to say, why are your friends so older than you? I'm like, oh, because I didn't realize, but these people would kind of get drawn to me somehow. They would say something about a problem and I will say something back, and they would say, oh, that's the answer, that's the solution, thank you very much. Or they will see me a few weeks later and go, oh, you know, that thing that you said, that was the answer I needed, my problem is gone. And I had no idea. But then as I was growing up and I realized that you could give advice and get paid for it, for me, that was a no-brainer, because it was an element that I felt was very natural to me in terms of giving advice. And then coming back into now what I do, even with the Akashic Records, is about finding information, giving people advice to be able to live their happiest lives. So, yeah. So it's
fascinating, absolutely fascinating. So I'm curious, Maggie, that, you know, if somebody has booked you ostensibly for business advice,
yes.
Do you automatically bring in the
Akashic Records?
Or do you have to feel the ground first? Because I'm for some of your business clients would actually not want to know at all about
For most people it's a kind of a no-no area, really. They want to touch it before, you know, if they don't see it, it doesn't exist. So for me, and again, that was one of the ways why I was resistant, and I was like, well, I'm not going to sit on the board and talk about spirit, they will think I'm mad, that kind of thing. But when people come to me, you know, depending on the direction they came from, they have a business issue, we go through how we're going to solve the business issue, or explain how we work, and, you know, whatever. Now I do sometimes mention there is a holistic element to my business. Now, for a lot of the clients, they will say, oh yeah, what is that? Tell me about it. And then as I start to explain, for some reason, a lot of them would like to hear more about that element. And so I do explain that element of my business to them, if they, you know, if they are that interested. Otherwise, there are people that I will purely work with along the business side. Although there is, so for instance, when I set up my business, I thought I was going to just do growth consulting. Very quickly, I realized that my clients definitely wanted me to be something else. They wanted me to be like a mentor to them. And that's how my business evolved into business and personal growth. And so for most of the clients I work with, maybe they've set up a growth goal for themselves, but it's not the growth goal that is not achievable. They need to grow within themselves. Sometimes it's a door that they're knocking on, they're not sure how to open that door to be able to kind of bring that into being. And so my work has evolved that way, and in a really interesting way. A lot of the people who approach me are very open-minded as well. But I would say I would always meet everyone at their point of need. And then I have individual clients who are not, some of them may be entrepreneurial, others will be individual clients who work somewhere, that kind of thing. But they are all over the world. There are a lot of them in Australia, US, Canada, Egypt. I had a lot of clients in Egypt from Egypt last year because someone recommended me there. Europe, parts of Europe. And these people are people who are looking at connecting more deeply with who they are. And so they'll come to me, either they've heard of the Akashic Records and they want to have consultation to address certain things in their own lives, or to tap into a next stage of themselves. Or they want to, use it in a way of, settling some issues. Sometimes about relationships. Sometimes we have relationships with people where we may have some soul contracts with that is connected in the past life or something like that. And they may have tried so many ways of resolving it, it's not working. And when they get to the root cause of it in terms of why this is happening, they're also able to release anything that needs to be released. And so part of that work goes deeper into the healing work that I do as well. And it's all about balancing us emotionally, physically, mentally, and spiritually.
Really fascinating, because actually and what you've illustrated here today is a different style of story, because what you've done is weave the personal throughout your entire business life, as it were, as opposed to come here and told us a story of when you were 22, this happened, kind of thing. And so I think that's really important, because some people actually really find it hard to come up with, even if it's only an ordinary everyday story rather than the big story, they still find it hard to think of something, but there will always be a theme that will have gone through their lives, and you've mentioned your theme. How would you pull out learning for our audience today? Because to me there's kind of no point in telling a story, fascinating it is, unless there's some real learning for anybody that's listening.
So I would say, the learnings here for me and for everyone is to really keep connecting to who you are. The word authenticity is such a big word these days, and there's a reason why, because everyone is starting to understand the importance of connecting to our core selves, to who we really are. Because that's where we find the answers and resolve anything, so we can live purposeful lives. So as you keep connecting to your authentic core self, also be very open to the idea that it will keep evolving, and all the aspects of you that are coming out, that are evolving, is not different, very, very different from the person who started. We are all evolving and growing, and it's about living our best lives as well as serving others in a great way as well.
That's fabulous, Maggie. Thank you so much. And yeah, that's really, not only now do I know a lot more about you and how you work, but you've given me food for thought today, so that's amazing.
Thank you.
We're going to bring to a close now, but thank you for sharing all of that. And when the post goes up, please pop in the comments box and put your contact URLs, but where can people find you? Where's the best place to find you, Maggie?
You can find me at maggiesarfo.com/personal growth. That is if you're really excited about, this element of the story that we've been talking about. Or if it's more kind of the general business stuff that I do, as well as the leadership executive mentoring stuff, then it's merisconsult.com. So MERES consult, CONSULT.com.
Okay, lovely. But if you put both those links in, then and also
I will come and put them there.
You're fairly active on LinkedIn as well, aren't you?
I am, yes. So you will find me on LinkedIn as maggiesarfo.com. To be honest, you find me everywhere as maggiesarfo.com. So Instagram, the same, here on Facebook as well. And on Twitter, if you're a Twitter fan, then it's Meet Maggie Sarfo.
Okay. And any last comments you wanted to make for the audience or the listeners?
I would say, especially with everything that's going on in the world, it's really important for you to connect to the person inside of you in order to be able to create a semblance of happiness or positivity around you. And I think the more we can all do that, the more we can all connect inside and then radiate our positivity out into the world, the more we can create an outer world which will be more positive despite what it looks on the outside. So thank you so much for listening. Any questions at all, please feel free to comment below and I'll do my best to come and answer for them. For you, please tag me when you do ask a question.
That's absolutely lovely, Maggie. Thank you so much. And I think, as you say, the word authenticity is kind of overused now, but I think the reason for that is you can't find another word that means the same.
Yes.
So it has to be used because nothing else. We hear it all the time, don't we? Be your authentic you. People want to connect with the authentic you, and they do. So, and without, real is sort of, but it's not strong enough, is it? So that's been absolutely super. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rachel.
We'll see you again very soon at one of our Athena meetings.
Absolutely, I'm sure.